Hi, this is Toby from the International Association for Political Science Students, and right now I'm here with Dirk Nabers, professor at Kiel University. I'm really happy to have you here.
Thanks for the invitation.
And we're talking today about your research that you are presenting here at the ISA annual convention in San Francisco, which has the topic Difference, Othering, Antagonism, and Security Threats, exploring the nexus between exclusion, identity, and security. But before talking more concretely about your research, I want to ask you, you define yourself as a post-structuralist. When was the point in your career that when you realized you're not interested into mainstream art theories, but you're rather want to pursue this kind of international relations?
Well, I used to be an institutionalist, then became a constructivist, and later read sources like Jacques Derrida and Ernesto Laclau, who convinced me that the talk that is widespread in IR about independent variables, dependent variables, causality, and stuff like that is not really shedding enough light on the problems that we face nowadays in our world. So I turned to more structuralist thinking, which then necessitates a definition of structure, which in structuralism again is not sufficiently developed. So I turned to what is called post-structuralism, which is a problematic notion in itself. But well, for the moment,
yeah.
Okay.
You studied also in Japan, right? And lived in Asia for a while. Did this Asian experience kind of contribute to widening your horizon in this way and to rethink?
Yes, of course it did, because it usually raises questions such as who am I? What's the group I belong to? What characterizes the group? Who's in? Who's out? On what grounds do we exclude people? So the whole difficult notion of identity came to my mind increasingly when I lived in Japan. And that was 25 years ago. And since that time, I've been working on identity mainly.
How was IR different in Japan than it was in Germany?
Well, it's still different because if you talk to people in Japan, in China, in South Korea, they're very much dominated, I would say, by realist thinking, by balance of power thinking. It's probably also the case that the structure of power relations in the region, with a huge power such as the People's Republic of China, demands such a thinking more than in other parts of the world. And it's still there. If you talk to people in Japan and China nowadays, they think in these terms. So how can we balance China? How can Japan, for instance, in cooperation with Australia, balance China, and so on, which is something that, of course, you don't do if you're a post-structuralist any longer, because it's all about material capabilities, while for post-structuralists, it's about discourses, it's about meaning systems and how they constitute subjectivities and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm. So you say structuralism does not give you the answers that you are looking for. So what are the questions then that you are interested in, that you're asking?
Well, for instance, if you look at a structuralist analysis such as Wendt's, which is widely quoted, his book that was published in 1999 has these three cultures of anarchy: the Hobbesian culture, the Lockean culture, the Kantian culture. The question for a post-structuralist would be, how do we actually get from a Hobbesian culture to a Kantian culture? How is that change, that transformation possible that actually occurred in Europe between, let's say, the 1870s, when the Franco-German War was over the First World War and the Second World War? What we see today is that Germany and France, those countries that have always been at war with each other, are now actually friends and are the engines of the European project. So trying to understand that, you need a notion of structure that leaves room for, well, that transcends determinism, essentialism, that leaves room for contingent decisions, and this is something that is very strong in what we call post-structuralism.
Mm-hmm. And so, moving closer to what you're doing here, what is the main question within post-structuralism that you're working on right now?
It's the notion of difference and the notion of antagonism. There seems to be a bit confusion in the field with regards to notions such as enmity, friendship, difference, othering, exclusion, identity, antagonism. I wouldn't say it's a mess and it's all mixed up, but what we're trying to do, me and my colleague Frank Stengel from Kiel University, is to disentangle these notions, to shed light on how notions from continental philosophy such as Heidegger, Derrida, Deleuze, but also post-structuralism such as Ernesto Laclau can help remedy the deficits that persist and clarify the fundamental notions of difference and antagonism, which are, in our view, the most fundamental notions to really understand what's going on the planet. Mm-hmm. And if you want me to say a few words on those two notions, of course, difference definitely. And, well, what we're claiming in the paper that we're presenting today, this afternoon actually, is that difference is actually the constitutive feature of any society, of any social formation. So you have you, and you have me, and you've got Tobias Scholz in his biological features, and perhaps also you could say you're from Germany and I'm from Germany, but that doesn't say anything about you. It doesn't say anything about me. Biology, a post-structuralist would say, doesn't say anything about what you are and what your position in a society is. What is more important, post-structuralists would claim, is the notion of difference. What is between us? Is there rivalry? Is there friendship? Is there respect? Why did you invite me to come here in the first place? So what constitutes me as a subject within our society is what we call the logic of difference. So difference is more important than identity. If you look into the history of philosophy, you will see that identity has always been privileged. While we say, in company with Deleuze, with Derrida, with Laclau, that difference is the far more important notion because it says something about what's between us. So the empty space that defines us as subjects in a society. In my case, I'm a family man in the morning usually, then I go to university where I'm different again, and in the evenings I might go to a sports club and drink beers with my friends. So what we call overdetermination actually defines our position in a society, which is not essential but is ephemeral. Identities are ephemeral, they are never stable. So something like a German identity, a German lead culture that is constituted by stable identities, what we call chimera, it doesn't really exist. And it's actually even a dangerous notion. Then the notion of antagonism comes into play. If we want to define ourselves as a group, like say Germans or fans of a particular sports club, the logic of equivalence, a famous notion that Ernesto Laclau has put forward, comes into play. We can only define ourselves as a group by way of excluding others. And this does not occur on essential grounds, on the basis of some biological features, such as what the Nazis have suggested between 1933 and 1945, but on the basis of contingent articulations of what we are, on the basis of traditions, of course, but these traditions are never stable, never essential, never eternal, and that is what we call, in a further step, the radical institution of society, or the impossible subject of society.
Yeah. Before moving to my next question, I also want to invite you, of course, to raise your questions. So if you have a different opinion or a question or some input for us that might be interesting to discuss, please raise your point as well. I'm curious, you mentioned at a point in the beginning of your argument that there is confusion about all these concepts. So are there actors that actually bring this confusion into these concepts, or what is the cause for this entanglement and the confusion that has been created?
Well, there's there's two sides to this story. There's confusion within the theoretical literature of IR. So if you go through the literature, which we do in our paper, we quote lots of sources there where notions such as difference and antagonism are used coterminously, but also within our societies, in our Western societies, it's a difficult notion because we see a widespread abuse or misuse of the notion of identity by far-right movements in the United States, in what is called right-wing populism in Europe, by identitarian movements. They claim that identity exists. And we would always claim in opposition to that argument that there is no such thing as a stable identity and essential identity. And if you look into the history of the European peoples, that you will see that it's a nice mixture of peoples coming together, living together. While nowadays, especially populist movements try to shut off societies, try to suture societies on the basis of an essentialist notion of society, and that would also be a suggestion I have to make here, that you invite more people speaking on the difficult notion of identity, on difference, antagonism, and stuff like that, because there's an ethical dimension to it that is crucial for our understanding of world politics.
Mm-hmm. We have one question from Vasily. He asks, many are talking about the beginning of a new Cold War between Russia and the West. Do you think difference is one of the problems here? And if yes, how is it possible to solve this conflict? That's a big question.
It's a huge question. I hope that there is no new Cold War on the horizon, but of course, what we do in post-structuralism is we're looking at what we call hegemonic discourses. So Putin, for instance, and Trump don't really play a role in what we do. What is more important to what we're doing is how is it possible for an American society, and how is it possible for a Russian society to produce a subject like Putin, like Trump, that actually leads their people into a new Cold War? I'm not able to predict the future, but I think the situation is pretty difficult and dangerous at the moment. So I'm not really optimistic about what's going on. But forgive me if I'm not really looking into the future right now.
What exactly are you looking at when you're not looking at state leaders, for example? So what are these the units you're observing, for example, or what are the processes and the non-structures or the...
Yeah, we're looking at dominant discourses, making possible figures like Trump and Putin. We're looking at what we call hegemonic discourses. In order to do so, we use rather sophisticated methods of corpus linguistics, where we look at large discourses, huge millions of sources that we then look at by means of modern software systems, and we can see shifts and breaks and discourses, how dominant truths are produced in discourses, and how subjectivities are produced. So this is what we're doing. So we don't start with agency, we always start with the analysis of structure.
When you look at these kind of discourses, do you observe differences in different dimensions of discourses? So for example, if you look at newspaper or television or interviews, social media now?
Well, it always depends on what you want to do on your research question, actually. If you're interested in how popular media or popular culture, even like videos, YouTube videos, Twitter accounts, how they produce subjectivities, you look at that. So what we actually do is you can look at governmental sources to look at at how hegemonic certain discourses have become. You look at oppositional discourses and media discourses in order to analyze what we call hegemonic struggles. You look at popular culture and media discourses again, but also marginalized discourses, novels perhaps, but also art, in order to shed light on what we call sedimented practices, how deeply rooted in a society certain views of, say, gender relations or of certain processes of excluding minorities are, and so on. So it depends on your research question, whether you look at these different levels. But we do all of them, actually.
Is there a problem within this part of the discipline when it comes to autocratic countries where you cannot look into all parts of the discourses? So we can observe discourses in liberal democracies and in countries that have some limits to civil rights and political liberties, but don't we have a structural problem also with like observing the constraints or the problems of these discourses in autocracies, and does that maybe have an influence in what we find out analytically?
Of course it does. I mean, I always tell my students, don't speculate too much about North Korea. We don't have the sources. We always have the sources problem. You need to speak the language. You need to get into the country. There's a lot of speculation going on. Taking that example of North Korea, none of us, or few of us, have actually been there. A colleague of mine, a former doctoral student of mine, and I have published a piece on that in International Studies Perspectives in 2011 on North Korea and how we can actually categorize North Korea without actually being able to get into the country and get to the sources that enable us to do it. It's tricky, it's difficult, yeah, but we always have that problem. And that is particularly so with autocratic regimes where we don't have the access to the sources we actually need for our research. So what we need to do would do interviews in North Korea, or we would need to get into the country and collect sources, but that's obviously impossible. So yes, we have a problem here.
Another question that I find interesting, also knowing that you have been to Japan and lived there for a while, do you face problems with conceptualizing like antagonism and othering, and in a way that you need to, or you want to apply it in a global context, or is this your approach that these concepts can be applied in a global context, or how do you look on your research? Are these concepts universal, or are there certain borders?
I would say so. What we're doing by using concepts such as the logics of equivalence and difference, antagonism, what we're talking about is a social ontology or a political ontology. So we're not actually looking at specific cases. What we're doing here is a meta-theoretical endeavor that you can actually then transfer to the ontic, the empirical level. But there's conflict everywhere. There's group formation everywhere, in Indonesia as well as in Denmark. So yes, I have a problem with the notion of universality, but in that case, since we're talking about an ontological endeavor here, yes, I would say it's applicable to almost any case that you're looking at.
Mm-hmm. Do you already know what you do after this conference, researching on, or is there a broader project that you want to follow up?
I've just launched a new series called Palgrave Studies in Global Political Sociology, and my colleague Frank Stengel and I write a textbook on global political sociology right now, which we're trying to finish off by the end of the year. So this is a co-authored book that we're producing at the moment.
I'm interested the concepts that you're using, and also in the context now that you mentioned you write this book together with your colleague. Is there, when you adapt or concepts from sociology, bring them into IR research, do you feel that you try to adapt them for IR, or do you feel you need to edit them, looking at othering, for example, as a concept that does not derive from IR but from sociology? How's the process of bringing terms from other disciplines into our discipline?
Well, it's always been like that from the beginning of our discipline, actually. If you look at people like Hans Morgenthau, who's been trained in law and also in philosophy, who has actually transferred notions from law, philosophy, sociology, Max Weber, into the beginnings of IR, and we're actually pursuing a similar path. We're looking at sources foreign to IR, which is anthropological, philosophical, sociological. And what I keep telling my students is that you can have different perspectives. You can do rational choice, and rational choice is something that you can use in Denmark as well as in Argentina. You can do norm-oriented research, which you can again do in Brazil and in Germany. Or you can do discourse theory and discourse analysis, which we're doing. I find rational choice rather narrow, norm orientation a bit broader, while discourse theory is actually the queen of all the analytical approaches that we find. So yes, we read sources foreign to IR and then transfer them to the social domain that we call the global social.
All right. Thank you very much. I think that gave us a really good impression of what you're working on right now and what is behind all this research. And thank you also for answering questions, and all the best for your research here and in the next years.
Thanks to you, and all the best to you. Good luck with your future career.
Thank you. Goodbye.
Bye.